Now we're kind of taking a slightly different format, which is the founder interview. I've known Adam for a while now, and I asked Adam, I said, would you fancy coming to the Kombucha Summit and having a chat to me on stage, just like we were in a pub somewhere having a chat.
Yeah, but you told me it was going to be like 20 people. So.
Yeah. But so Adam's from JARR Kombucha, which is I'm going to have one of these now. But Adam's was one of the founders of JARR Kombucha in London, near Crate Brewery in London, and from kind of humble beginnings of the brand. And the guys are going from strength to strength. They're doing about 50,000 bottles a month now. I might like to say that. And
that's still very, very small.
And more recently, less than 12 months ago, they got bought out by Duvel, which is a large global beer company. And I thought Adam's story, while they're still growing and still have a lot of good things ahead of them, I think Adam's story is quite unique. You know, there's not many kombucha companies in Europe that have been bought out or had, taking their business to that level. So I asked Adam to come here today. So thanks, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I thought we'd start by just asking, you mind telling us a little bit about your background, kind of where you come from, kind of just, yeah.
I guess my background is that I'm from Los Angeles, which I guess gives me some experience in kombucha just because I've been drinking it for like 10 years. But I first learned to brew from Hannah, who's up front here, who's going to be speaking later. The story's a bit long, so I'll try and condense it, but I'm a big believer in synchronicity and people coming together at interesting times. And I was actually supposed to be, I was living in Los Angeles in 2015, and I was moving to San Francisco, and I packed a van full of stuff, and I started driving up there, and halfway up to San Francisco, I got a call from my mom saying the apartment I was supposed to be moving into was my sister's, and it had burned down on the drive up, randomly. She was out on a run, she came back, the apartment was destroyed. So this apartment I was supposed to move into was gone, so I had to turn around and come back to LA. And I was like, I don't know what to do with my life. So I moved in with my parents. And in a week after that, my friends and now business partners in JARR had a layover on their way back from Australia and New Zealand to London, where they run a beer brewery. And they stayed with me and my parents, and I opened up the fridge, and I had loads of kombucha. And I pulled it out, and I was like, have you guys heard of this stuff? And they're like, we were just introduced to this in Auckland. We love it. But we don't really know anything about it. So sat around the kitchen table, we came up with this crazy idea to teach ourselves how to make kombucha and start a kombucha brewery. We had no background in kombucha fermentation. They knew how to make beer. So the first thing I did was book a flight to London. So 2 months later, I was in London. But those initial 2 months were spent understanding how to make kombucha on a home brewing scale. And the first person I contacted was Hannah. I searched on Google how to make kombucha. I looked on YouTube how to make kombucha. I'd been drinking it for many years, but I didn't actually know how to make it. And then I went to Hannah's house and got my first SCOBY and got my first tea and jar and then started experimenting and then moved to London and started making it on a slightly bigger scale.
Yeah, awesome. So you partnered up with the guys from Crate Brewery, right? I've been there with you, but yeah. They've got a kind of a really cool setup in East London.
Yeah.
And you kind of took over a bit of space there. What was the first 12 months like there?
Kind of a nightmare because we didn't really know anything about kombucha. And apart from home brewing, there actually weren't many people that were willing to share much information with us because most of the breweries around that time were in the States, and it was a very secretive kind of thing. People were scared that people were going to steal information. So the first 12 months were just experimentation and losing batches and like trying to figure out, how much sugar we should use based on a homebrew recipe and scaling that up and realizing it doesn't exactly equate to a 1,000-liter batch. So it was pretty tough. The first 6 months were just sourcing the ingredients and understanding the fermentation. The further 6 months were developing the brand and developing the product before we eventually launched in, I think, April of 2016.
Yeah, awesome. So you set up your own kombucha bar, right? So part of where you work out is actually turns into a nightclub some evenings, right?
Yeah,
but you also set up a kombucha bar in that space, right?
Initially, because we have this big warehouse space in Hackney Wick in East London. And initially we're like, we're going to turn this space into a kombucha tap room. People are going to love it. and nobody came. Like, nobody knew what kombucha was, nobody cared. And our kombucha was so bad at the time that Time Out magazine came and secretly reviewed the kombucha and said, don't go to Hackney Wick for kombucha, it tastes like gone off vinegar. So we were like, shit, wow, that sucks. But it sort of like got us to like really get our shit together and start like really understanding the fermentation more. But it was an interesting experiment to get feedback direct from customers about kombucha and which flavors we should launch. And we're actually considering doing a second iteration of that, so JARR 2.0, which hopefully next year will open. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Hopefully people will turn up this time.
But actually, just on that note, the kombucha bar eventually turned into a nightclub. So like come Friday afternoon, we basically clear out everything in the kombucha brewery. Like we clear the whole floor. You're
still doing this today, right?
We're still doing this. And then Friday to Sunday, it's like a full-on like Berlin-style techno nightclub. It's pretty nuts. We can fit like 500 people in there. So if you're ever in London, come drink kombucha with us and come dance to techno.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you guys have kind of created a pretty unique brand, right? Like when I go to the stores like Planet Organic in London and I look at the range, like you've created something quite unique in terms of your branding, the style of your bottle, how you position yourselves, how you talk about your brand, the things you say or don't say. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Was that really always clear from the very start, or was it kind of an evolutionary process?
I think that we'd seen sort of what was being done in the States, and we saw that kombucha was sort of pigeonholed into this health space. You know, kombucha is a healthy drink, but it also is much more than that. It has the capacity to be an alcohol alternative, a soft drink. And so we basically decided to create a brand that looked completely different from what we'd seen out there. We took inspiration from a design perspective from Aesop and other minimalist kind of style brands. So we wanted it to look really beautiful, and we also wanted it to taste different than the kombuchas that we found out there. So we purposefully made quite a sour kombucha that's quite high in acetic acid, because that's what we wanted. We wanted something that was a bit shocking. The name JARR signifies when you drink it, you're sort of jarred out of your preconceived notions of what a soft drink can be. And so we were trying to, and are still trying to, push the kind of strong flavor of kombucha. Like we didn't want to shy away from that. So everything from the brand to the flavor to the way we spoke about the brand was a bit different, I think, than what we'd seen previously. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And like just on the brand, I guess when you see it in the stores as well, you have a very different price point than most kombuchas, right? It's a premium brand, it's a premium kombucha, and you kind of demand a premium price for that. Is that hard when you're trying to like introduce a new category, introduce a new product? Most people didn't know what kombucha was, and you say, "Oh, I want to charge." Like, I don't know how much you charge for that, like $6 or something, right?
They're like $5.50.
Yeah, right. Like, is that a conversation that's? How do you do that? Like, how do you?
Well, our first stockist was Harrods. We randomly got hooked up with the buyer there, so they were fine with the price point, and we sort of wanted to test it in that market as a premium. Like, you know, you talked earlier about ultra premium kombucha. That's basically what we are, but we're slowly working our way down. And really, we want to drop the price, but these bottles and the screen printing is so crazy expensive, and also the fact that we still brew, hand bottle, hand cap, put these little like things on, these little tamper-proof seals by hand. It's ridiculous. So the cost of our labor, the cost of the ingredients, the cost of the bottle, it means that we have to charge that amount of money, and it's certainly becoming more and more of an issue as we have brands coming into the market that are selling for like $150 a bottle when we're at
challenging, right?
$5.50 or $3.50.
Yeah. Especially like UK retail is so like price sensitive, right?
We're not in any of the major retailers, like any of the supermarkets, because our price point's too high. But we're working on that right now, so getting costs down and also launching a new format. So
yeah, that's a good point actually. The slides I showed earlier on from the UK data, they don't include like bars, restaurants, independent retailers, health food stores, and all other kind of channels that you guys are in. So you didn't really while you're probably like performing really well, you don't kind of appear in that data. I think it's important to kind of note that. But yeah, so do you think there was like, with all those kind of challenges now that you've grown and you've got a lot of demand, but you kind of have all these problems that you've inherited from decisions you made earlier in the day. Like, is there things you think, oh, I wish we did that differently. I wish we didn't make that decision when we started, you know?
I think that we probably would have gotten a slightly cheaper bottle, these things, and maybe not screen printed. Although it's been really beneficial to the brand. I think we built a strong brand, which is one of our kind of main assets. But what was I going to say? In terms of and one of the things actually that's like a huge piece of advice, if I'm able to give any, which is when you outgrow your capacity to bottle yourself, have someone contract bottle for you, or be able to get a bottling line with investment. That's something we still haven't done. We still do all of our bottles by hand on these manual fillers. If you go on our Instagram, you can see it. It's crazy because we're trying to do commercial volumes in a craft setup, which is especially difficult for us. So we can produce the liquid, that's not a problem, but putting it into bottle is the biggest problem. So something probably we would have done is sucked it up and had someone bottle it for us until we were able to buy like a proper bottling line.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. So I touched on earlier, you see a lot of the big kombucha brands now, right? Like GTs are there in London where you guys are, Remedy, Hum. Do you feel pressure like in your kind of local environment that you've been carving out for years with all these other brands in the same space?
Yeah, London in particular is a really saturated market. When we started, we were the 4th kombucha brand. I think there was Go, Equinox, and Love Kombucha, which is now Lobros. And it was all fun and games for the first couple of years, and now it's like, whoa, there's like 35 brands just in the UK alone. So it's difficult to maintain a foothold, especially when everyone's at a lower price point. GTs and Hum and those guys, they're not so much.
They haven't really made much of a dent yet.
Not
right?
yet.
Yeah.
I think they probably will, but Kavita's come in there. PepsiCo obviously has like contracts with every major supermarket, and they have like huge scope of influence in that sector. And also Lobros and Remedy have, like 15 sales reps on the street, and they're 2 of the biggest brands. Remedy's one of the biggest brands in the world. So they've got huge resources behind them. And we're still, although we've taken investment from Duvel, they haven't entirely bought us out, we still are very much a homespun operation. So we don't have huge marketing budgets or anything like that, or a huge sales team feet on the street to get the product out there. So yeah, it's definitely been a challenge for sure. But I think we still have we've carved out a niche for ourselves as like a craft produced product that has kind of like a cultish following, I guess you could say, in London at least.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a bit of that going on. And Crate Brewery helps with that a lot, right? It's kind of like Cooley's London.
Yeah, Crate definitely helps. We partnered, my business partners own Crate, but we're separate businesses. But the way that we're able to afford a sales and marketing team is that we cross-charge based on turnover. So we sort of share sales and marketing function with someone who has more resources, which is really helpful and has been helpful in the over the past couple of years for helping us build the brand and grow the business.
Awesome. So if we just look at, so you guys, you mentioned that you've been kind of had investment and kind of majority bought out by Duvel. Do you mind talking about that a little and just kind of like, how does that happen? Did you guys go after that sort of thing, or was it something that happened more naturally?
We were looking for investment for quite a while. Maybe like 6 months or so. We'd been self-funded up until November of last year, and we wanted to partner with someone that didn't just have money, but could actually help us grow the brand in the way that we wanted to. And we met with dozens, probably 24 individual investors, VCs, big companies that had different ideas of what they wanted JARR to be or what they wanted kombucha to be in their eyes. And then we got a random message on LinkedIn from the sales director of Duvel in the UK, and he asked if he could come visit. We gave him a tour. He came with the CEO. No
pressure.
They're actually really cool people. Like it's a family-run business. They've been around for 150 years, and they make literally some of the best beer in the world. They own Le Chouffe, they own Vedette, Duvel, a couple craft beer brands in the States, and their focus is on creating the highest quality, most premium kind of product possible, but at a reasonable price point. So we've got sort of the first part of it, but we're working towards the second. And the synergy between us and them just clicked. It was perfect. And what it allows us to do is utilize their entire sales function, their marketing function, their production capabilities, and their vast wealth of knowledge when it comes to sort of fermentation in general, and also their distribution channels throughout Europe. So because London is becoming, and the UK is becoming so saturated, we need to look further afield in order to grow the brand, and helping us allows us to tap into other countries in Europe. So that should be, hopefully next year you'll be seeing us across Europe. Yeah,
awesome. So, being such a traditional beer company that Duvel are, what was their kind of take on getting into kombucha or investing in JARR?
I think
what was the motivation behind that?
I think it's the same as a lot of big breweries, like Molson Coors has invested in I think it was Clearly Kombucha
from California.
Yeah, and then Coca-Cola's invested in Health Aid, and I mean, there's just so much investment going on in that world right now. AB InBev has kombucha, which is that hard kombucha. So I think in particular, Duvel was looking to expand their non-alcoholic offering. They'd had a lot of requests from their stockists over the past couple years that were looking for low ABV or completely non-alcoholic products. They were trying to develop a range or a couple of different drinks around that, and kombucha was something that was on their radar, and and it just seemed to be the perfect fit for what they were looking for. I think breweries in general and big kind of companies are looking to expand their product offering to accommodate for this new kind of experience of people not drinking as much.
Yeah, okay. And is it obviously if your own brewery, you turn it into a nightclub, you've got kind of your own thing going on, right? You manage yourselves, right? You said you were self-funded up to this point. Have you seen a big transition in how you operate, the demands upon you, and the expectations now that you're kind of I guess at more of a boardroom setting?
Not as much as I anticipated, actually. Strangely, they sort of let us do our own thing, and they act as more advisors, which is the ideal scenario. It's kind of difficult because you never know what the relationship will be after you've taken investment. So they are majority shareholders. They own 60% of the business now. But we still have board seats. We're still directors, and we still make all the decisions in the UK. So when it comes to production, to sales, to marketing, we run everything, and we catch up with them throughout the week about updates. And big decisions, we have to run by them and stuff and all agree on, but it's not like they will ever tell us what to do and we have to do it. So it's a really kind of mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah, sounds like it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's ideal. I mean, we're really fortunate in that sense.
Yeah, awesome. So with all that and all the good things happening to you guys, and all this strength behind you, so what do you see now as the future of JARR, in the coming 1, 3, 5 years, 10 years,
I think we're trying to. There's a couple of things we're focusing on. One is expansion into Europe, both in bottle and probably in can. Another is expanding our on draft kind of offering. On draft kombucha is popping up more and more in the UK. I'm not really sure how it is throughout Europe, but there's more and more brands doing it. There's some really cool brands like Compassion Kombucha. I think Compassion's here, and based in Hackney. So brands like that and brands like ours, we're trying to get more and more kombucha on tap available to people in that format. And that's something we've been doing since the early days, offering kombucha in kegs and stuff in bars and restaurants. And I think with more awareness growing, we're going to see more and more kombucha on draft, and it's just I really like that. I think that's sort of the future.
It is a good format, right?
Yeah, and also I mentioned JARR 2.0. We want to do a microbrewery with a tap room where we do loads of experimental batches, because that's what really excites me. Having a core range of products, but also having constantly innovating, creating weird and wonderful things. I'm not sure if we're going to touch on that, but. But basically, we've been experimenting with some alcoholic kombucha. We made a kombucha champagne recently using fig leaves and champagne yeast, which is similar to that the premiumized.
Copenhagen teak.
So it reminded me very much of that. And we've made a hemp kombucha. We were always making these one-off batches just to gauge what people think. So always innovating, and then maybe eventually turning that into a main a product that we're actually going to sell in our core range.
Do you find that like a big demand or feel pressure on that you guys to constantly be innovating? Like right now you've got 4 flavors, but you only recently launched your raspberry. Do you feel the need to like constantly, so the consumers don't get like flavor fatigue and you're constantly looking fresh and exciting? Is that something?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of shelf space, if you go into Planet Organic or Whole Foods, you'll see Lobros and Remedy have like 10 facings because they've got so many flavors. But really, I would assume that only 2 or 3 of those really sell in large volumes. So for us, it's always been about keeping it simple. Like, there's no reason to complicate things. I think it got a bit stagnant after 3 years of selling the same flavor, and we're like, fuck it, let's do a raspberry. The innovation stuff is what keeps it fresh. We don't feel pressure to innovate. It's the thing that I personally love to do, and that the production team loves to do. So we're always creating weird and wonderful flavors and partnering up with certain people in the industry, whether that's cocktail makers or whether that's tea houses or whether that's various events that we can kind of like highlight these things at and get feedback from people.
Yeah, awesome. That's fantastic. I guess last question, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. But there's a lot of ambitious entrepreneurs in the room, a lot of young brands with big plans. Would you have any advice? If you were in your own shoes, advising yourself a few years ago, what advice would you give?
I actually thought you might ask that, so I wrote these things down. But I honestly don't feel worthy of...
You think we prepared this earlier.
I don't feel worthy of giving advice. There's people here that are much more experienced in fermentation than me. So yeah, I feel honored to even be up here. But I guess if I could go back, don't try and do everything yourself. Make sure that the team that you work with, that you all have balanced skill sets. Some people like to do sales. They like to be feet on the street. Some people like to produce kombucha. Some people like to do the numbers. So work to your strengths, and don't overdo it. You're gonna, you run yourself into the ground. Like in the early days, I was making the kombucha, I was running the kombucha tap room / bar on the weekends and trying to do sales and marketing as well, and it was just like, it was a nightmare. So having the right team and like balancing yourselves and checking in with each other constantly. The brand is just as important as the liquid. Obviously, if you have a cool brand and the liquid tastes like shit, no one's gonna buy it. So obviously focus on the liquid, but also, I think from our perspective, creating the brand was a really important aspect of our growth. Hold on to loads of backup SCOBY or starter liquid, because we put all of it into our first 2,000 liter batches and they went off. And then we had to wait another 2 or 3 months to get that liquid back up. So always have some starter liquid or SCOBY on call, just tuck it aside for a rainy day just in case something happens.
Sebastian says if it goes bad, don't throw it out. Everything turns to acid eventually.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Don't try to grow too fast, I guess. This is something that we've, initially we're from home brewing to trying to create a commercial kombucha brewing operation. That was a stupid idea. We didn't realize how difficult it was to scale up from a 1 liter brew to a 1,000 liter brew. They don't behave the same. Your bacteria doesn't behave the same. They have to settle into that space. They're living. It's it's like chucking this living thing into something that it doesn't understand and then expecting it to do the same thing that it was doing before. So slow growth is really important, both with regards to producing the liquid, but also growing a brand. And focus on safety and consistency. I think for us, we didn't really know much about the liquid itself that we were producing for a long time, and then we worked with Campton BRI. We've worked with more recently with Duvel, and we brought in a consultant actually probably 2 years into brewing that completely changed the way that we made kombucha. And we can proudly say that our kombucha is completely below 0.5% alcohol while also being properly brewed. So we still brew with the old-fashioned way: tea, water, sugar, and a SCOBY. But it's just like a little side note, I took a year off drinking last year, and I still drank lots of kombucha. And there were a couple times I went to Whole Foods and I bought some kombucha that I really like from other brands, and they got me drunk. And I was like, what the hell? And I think there's a lot of people out there that are drinking kombucha as an alcohol alternative. Yeah, some people want to get buzzed from booch, and that's fine. But creating a safe and consistent product for your consumers, making sure that what you're giving them is what you say it is, because kombucha is this product that varies wildly, and it's difficult to control. You never really can control it, to be honest. That's the beauty of it. But creating something that's safe and consistent for your consumers, so what they think they're drinking is what they're actually drinking. So.
Yeah, for sure. Great. That was so good. Thank you very much. We might open it up to some Q&A if anyone's got any questions, hopefully.
Cool. And you're just sticking with kombucha, like your same flavors? Are you going to like diversifying like products at all, or like just kombucha all day long and just?
I mean, we'll probably do an alcoholic kombucha at some point. Yeah, kombucha for us is the main focus. We don't really know anything about anything else.
I have the question regarding the market of kombucha, because Dennis had very nice presentation about the kombucha market, but still we got very small information. So could you tell us what segment kombucha is competing? So if you take the beverage segment, yes, there is many kind of beverages. So what is the segment that kombucha is grabbing the market?
In London, I'd say most cafes stock kombucha. So the easiest thing initially is just to approach local coffee shops. We're probably in 1,000 or a couple thousand of them throughout the UK. But that seems to be the place that kombucha naturally fits really easily. More and more restaurants we're seeing kombucha in, lots of gyms, kind of active places. And then organic shops. I mean, obviously, like, health food shops, stuff like that.
So, what is the competitor? What kind of beverage is the most closest competitor of the kombucha?
Probably cold pressed juice, I'd say. Yeah, probably same price point, and you'd find it in the same places. But they're different.
Well, what about energy drinks? Are they also?
Yes, probably. And someone asked recently if we thought it was a good idea to market kombucha as an energy drink. I don't think many people have done that. I mean, there's versions of energy drink type kombuchas that people are working on, but I know that energy drink shelf space in major retailers is falling away, and kombucha is sort of starting to fill those spaces. So people are less likely to drink, energy drinks full of shit, full of chemicals. And more interested in something like kombucha. But there are more and more natural energy drinks popping up. It actually might be an interesting question for Sophie, who's the buyer from Planet Organic, who's going to be speaking later, to see what she thinks.
This is an important question to just understand what is the size of the market. Because if the size is too small or it's too big, so if you are in the energy drink, I'm sure size is too big, and if you are in something else, then size will be something else. So
I think you could safely say the market is still in Europe reasonably nascent. I think we don't know. I think a lot of this information is somewhat speculative, but if you look at the States. That's sort of what we're working off in terms of kind of the bigger scale understanding of what this market has potential for, and also Australia. But Hannah might know more about that, about the States. Yeah, she can talk about that.
You said that a consultant came along and completely changed your production processes. I'm just interested to know what that change was.
So it's not really a secret. Part of what we do is we like to be transparent about everything we do. So this might be. What's the word? Controversial. But I suspect that many of you are already doing this. we don't use the classical version of the SCOBY anymore. We don't use the cellulose pellicle, as it's called. And the reason for that is it creates an anaerobic environment which stimulates the growth of further yeast and eventually ethanol. So what we do is we've specifically designed something called an acetator, which is how apple cider vinegar, among other vinegars, is produced. And it oxygenates the liquid constantly, which stimulates the bacteria growth and keeps the ethanol levels down. So we use about 25% of that for all of our brews as our SCOBY. So we use starter liquid as the SCOBY because it's the bacteria and yeast suspended in a liquid form, and it's much more direct for brewing. So he taught us how to do that. He helped us design a tank that did that for us, rather than spending $100,000 on. We were looking into something called a Fring, I think it's called. It's a German version of that, but we made our own for like $1,000. So you can do that, and it basically makes a much more consistent kombucha on a commercial scale, and also keeps the alcohol levels down while still creating an authentically brewed kombucha. I mean, we still brew for about 10 days at 24 degrees. So yeah, that's sort of the secret that he taught us, and it's wildly changed the way that our kombucha tastes week to week, batch to batch, much more consistent. Our tests come in non-alcoholic every time, so that was a game changer for us.
Just going on your point of safety and consistency, how often, or if you do, how often do you get your product tested?
We get it tested generally once a month for kind of pathogenic bacteria and stuff like that. Alcohol levels we test maybe every 2 weeks or something like that. And now that we partnered up with Duvel, they basically are able to test it constantly. We just had the basically the DNA of our SCOBY sequenced, which was really quite interesting. I recommend doing that, and it's really cool because you notice that that there are strains of bacteria or versions of acetic acid or acetobacter that are completely unique to your kombucha that haven't been defined yet. And that's the beauty of kombucha, that all of the kombucha that we make is totally different down to the microbes that are found within our kombucha. But it is, yeah, of course, important to have that tested regularly to make sure that it is safe for consumption and consistency. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, do you see a migration in your DNA sequencing, over weeks or months that things change?
Yeah, it does. It's always changing, even with the seasons. I mean, our kombucha is brewed in the middle of East London, and wild yeast and bacteria from the local area are inside of it, and it changes. Yeah, it changes constantly, not in huge like volumes, but it does change. And batch to batch, it tastes different. Week to week, month to month, it tastes different. There's most people wouldn't notice, but you know your kombucha quite intimately, and you taste that, and it's like, oh yeah, that's like slightly more yeasty, or there's a bit more acetic acid, a bit more gluconic acid. Like you're always working with something slightly different week to week, but that's like part of the ebb and flow of brewing, and it's like the most beautiful aspect of it, I think.
You were saying that when you sort of first went to the UK, your friends had the brewery, so you obviously had a lot of space, but I'm sure a lot of people here are going from that home environment into making that step up. How much space did you need within that brewery for the kombucha setup?
So initially, we only had like a bar space, like the size of a shipping container, and we had two 2,000-liter tanks that were reasonably tall and skinny. So we didn't really need much space initially, but we realized that those tanks were not ideal for kombucha brewing. So if anybody's looking to scale up from a home brewing operation, I recommend, when you do scale up, invest in wider squatter tanks so that the bacteria doesn't have as much space to have to go through in order to make the fermentation happen. So we now have custom designed wider squatter tanks that probably take up maybe like 1,000 square feet or something. We have like 25 of them. So actually not that much space. If you went, like our whole warehouse complex is big, but the space for fermentation is not that big. The space it's taken up the most is for our bottling, for our packaging, and for our bright tanks where we carbonate and we flavor the kombucha. So none of it's in like one location. It's like dotted throughout this warehouse space. But yeah, I mean, at some point, we're going to need to move into probably like a 10,000 square foot, 20,000 square foot space just for our own production. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Bea from Kombucha. Thank you very much for sharing all your information. I got a question about market. I know Kombucha, for example, and everyone does, is in the UK. And I don't know in the UK, but in Spain, they are too. And they're just giving their product for free, like to every cafe, every store, and they are even giving money.
Wow.
Yes. How are you competing against that in the UK? Because, you know, we are still we're a very fast growing brand, but we do everything in our hometown. Everything is artisan, everything is natural and real kombucha. But still we are very small and we do not have the resources to fight against PepsiCo. How did you do that, or how are you doing it, and how are we all gonna face it?
You're from Kombucha, did you say? Yeah, I've tried your kombucha before in the airport in Starbucks. That was amazing. It was really, really good. I was surprised to see it there. So thank you. That was great. But I think not to hate on Kombucha because it tastes okay. But the people that stock Kombucha are not necessarily the people that would stock JARR. And I think that our focus is we always push the local thing. We make this in London with a small team in London. And if we don't ever hate on other brands or anything, but we sort of highlight the positive aspects of ours. Some people just want to put a kombucha on their shelves because their customers are asking for it. They don't really care about its origin or the story behind it. And for us, it's not necessarily people that we want to stock with. We want people to champion our brand and tell the story to people and share what it's all about. And for us, it's more important to get accounts that do that rather than people that are interested in just stocking something because it's free or cheap and it just fits this little niche and gives them super high margins. So yeah, we have lost a couple customers as a result, not of Kombucha actually giving out free stock, but other brands. And that's just how it goes. I think you got to look at the wider picture. But yeah, just do the best you can. Keep making the best kombucha you can. Keep telling your story. Keep spreading the message on social media. Doing sampling campaigns, activating as much as possible, even if that's in a grassroots way. Something for us that we do is I teach probably once a week kombucha brewing workshops all across London, and that has been one of the biggest sources of grassroots marketing for us. And just spreading the message and plugging it and seeding it in different places, and that's been really beneficial. But yeah, it's difficult when there's tens of millions or billions or whatever it is behind some of these brands, and that's just the nature of it. But yeah.
I don't know about in the UK, but I know in France we have specialized organic stores and supermarkets, and people are very segregating the two. And we right now are working exclusively with organic stores and, of course, a few restaurants and tea shops. But locally, we're in a small town south of France. We can't make a living off of it as of yet. And maybe considering working with supermarkets. I was curious if you were considering working with supermarkets at some point, and if they made this distinction between the two, or could you work at supermarkets with JARR, or you'd have to make, let's say, a new brand?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we've had meetings with a lot of the major retailers like Waitrose and Sainsbury's and Tesco, and we can't compete on price. It's actually impossible for us to do that right now. We wouldn't create any other brand other than JARR. JARR is the singular focus. It would be about a new format, probably cans. That would lower the price point. And our bottles, sourcing them maybe direct from the supplier rather than going through a middleman. And we're not really at that level yet, but we're starting to think about it. Of course, we're going to need at some point to play in that space. But if you see this on the shelf in a Tesco in Sheffield, in the north of England, nobody's going to know what this is. So I think it's about educating the market before launching into those multiples. Because if we just launched right now, I don't think that our rate of sale would be good enough to justify it, and we'd probably be delisted. So it's about building the category, I think, before taking that leap into that space. Even though it might seem really exciting and potentially that you could make a lot of money from it, it probably wouldn't happen, at least initially. So we're waiting. We're waiting for the market to grow a bit more before we introduce a slightly more premium kombucha into that space.
It's back to me.
Yo.
So we're going to wrap up soon, but I just wanted to ask you about your friendship with GT Dave, and about you going to the Kombucha Lair, his house in Hollywood.
Yeah, me and GT Dave, we're both from LA. We actually have a lot in common. Actually, we first started brewing in our mom's kitchen. We're both obsessed with kombucha. Yeah, we connected on LinkedIn, and when I was home for Christmas, he invited me over, and I thought we were having lunch. I was like, "Do you want to get lunch?" And he's like, "No, just come over to my place." And I was like, "Really? Okay." So he has me over to his house, and I thought we were gonna have lunch. And this is a story that I've told you before.
Didn't he make you wait outside for like 30 minutes?
His maid let me in, and then I went and sat by the pool in his second house. He has two houses that are identical side by side. One of them is just for entertaining. And if any of you have seen the video online, it's great. It's hilarious. He's a wonderful guy, first of all. And I sat there and waited for about 40 minutes or something. And then he showed up, and he had two smoothies in his hand. And I was like, that's so nice of him to make me a smoothie. And they both had straws, and I was like, oh, cool. And then he proceeded to drink both of them. And I was like, fuck, I'm starving. And so we sat down, and he told me his personal story about finding kombucha and growing the business. And then we didn't really talk about kombucha. We ended up going inside. He showed me his his modern art collection, of which it's incredible, like millions worth of this incredible art that I don't fully understand. But we sat and we talked about spirituality and plant medicines and indigenous cosmology and what it means to be a human. And it was one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had. It was really, really cool. So we've kept in touch, and yeah, we're not best friends or anything, but we definitely have similar ways of viewing and perceiving the world. So I think he's a really fascinating person, and he's the reason why I started drinking kombucha and making kombucha in the first place. So I was when I was sitting with him, I was like, dude, this is fucking surreal. I was like, this is crazy. If I rewinded to 10 years ago, drinking your kombucha and not liking it initially after a yoga class, and then becoming obsessed with it and spending $40 a week on it, to sitting in your house talking about all these things, I was like, this is just wild. Yeah, it was really, really quite interesting. Yeah, he's a cool dude.
That's awesome. Maybe we should use this as a shout out to get GT
Dave
here next year for the founders interview. Yeah. Awesome. Adam, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you.